Welcome back. Today I'm going to be doing probably the biggest upgrade on my CRF250L that I've probably ever done, and that is to replace the stock shock with an Öhlins shock. I got this from SRC Moto. I believe they're out of Oregon, and this is a huge upgrade compared to the stock shock. So the stock shock is meant for a rider roughly 100 to maybe 140 pounds if you crank the preload up like I have. So I'm at the very limit of what this thing can do, and that's just me without my gear on. Once I put gear on and once I load up the bike with anything, that is not adequate. Not only that, but it has no adjustments other than preload. This Öhlins HO429 shock has compression adjustment and rebound adjustment, as well as preload. And this does come with a factory set preload that you're supposed to start with. I don't know where to go from here, so I'm just going to start there and hope that I can change it easily later. It also comes with a mounting bracket for the remote reservoir, as well as a handy set of instructions. Now you can get this off of the Öhlins website, but it's nice that they give you a printed version. They also have a printed version in, I think, some Arabic script. And then it comes with also a owner's manual, which actually has some really good information in it. Like, this stuff is written in the quality of documents that you'd get from like back in the 50s and 60s. It just explains everything very simple, very straightforward, in a way that any person can understand. For example, when it talks about rebound dampening, it gives you a few things to feel for while you're on the bike to say, is it, over damped or under damped? For example, if your vehicle feels unstable, loose, bouncy, increase the rebound dampening. If your vehicle feels hard or bumpy, decrease the rebound damping. And then for compression, it says if the vehicle feels unstable, soft, if it feels low, or if it's bottoming out, increase the compression dampening. And if the vehicle feels harsh, hard, or has bad grip, especially on acceleration, decrease the compression damping. And so that is some really good information, especially if you have, not as much understanding of how shocks work. But the best part, better than even the shock itself, it comes with not only one big sheet of stickers, it comes with 2 big sheets of stickers. Öhlins is doing it right. That's worth the price of admission right there. That's worth, to me, more than the shock is worth. It's not that hard to get good stickers, so I'm glad Öhlins does it. So from here, I'm going to show you how to remove this pile of junk and then install this glorious piece of beautiful art. The next step is to remove the rear brake fluid reservoir. And that will grant you access to the bolt that holds the top of the shock on. You'll see it right here. It should be out of focus for you right now, but don't worry, you'll get plenty familiar with it here soon. So you should be able to see it here. The nut is on the other side, and it is actually impossible to get to. You cannot get to it from up this way on the other side because the shock and then the battery box blocks your way in. You can get at it coming through the frame like this, but the way that the nut is clocked, I can't get my wrench on it. So my plan is to try and break it loose from this end and hope it turns the nut enough that I can get my wrench on it. So if you didn't catch that, the winning combination was a 17mm open end on the left side of the bike to hold the nut, and then a 6-point, I think it's very critical to have a 6-point socket on the right-hand side of the bike to break it loose with a ratchet. And I have just a 1/2 inch to 3/8 reducer adapter, and I think that's the best way to go. Then just let the washer and the nut fall to the floor somewhere, and then just try and pry out that bolt by hand. And there we have it. There's the original shock. Removing the rear linkages and the rear linkage bolts is really that easy. And then you just saw me use some kerosene and a brush to clean up these parts. And then off camera, I just took a shop rag and pushed these bushings through and then cleaned out the inside of the seals from any dirt. One of these seals, let's see if I can find which one it is. Okay, this seal right here has this portion about the width of my finger where there's a cut on either side, so that is going to be a leaking seal. For something like this, it's not such a big deal, but it isn't ideal. So what you don't want to do is push these bushings all the way through, because the needle bearings in here can just fall straight out. There's nothing keeping them in. They don't have any bearing cages. So when I'm gonna re-grease these, I'm just gonna push them halfway out, shove a bunch of grease in there, close it up, push it the other way through, and grease the other side, and that is more than enough to get the entire thing re-greased. And same goes for this, and this one actually has has 2 sets of rollers in it. There's one in this half and one in that half. Something I didn't know is that these are actually made of cast steel. So if you wanted to drop some more weight from the bike, because these are very heavy, is get some CNC billet aluminum versions of these. You'd probably end up, dropping probably another whole pound or so off the bike. Not strictly necessary, but it's just one of those things you can do. And as I said, I also cleaned up the fasteners. You can actually tell that this fastener was on the bottom because it's the most corroded. Same with, you can tell that this was the leading edge of this triple pivot mechanism because of all the rock chips and rust right there. So to re-grease these, I'm just going to use some red and tacky grease. The manual only says you need an NLGI number 2 compliant grease, so use whatever you like. I don't think it makes too much difference. The book will specify if you need some moly disulfide grease, and this is not a place where it calls for that. So if you want to use some grease with high molybdenum content in it, you can, but Honda doesn't think that it's necessary. Now the odds are that most of what you put in there is going to come straight back out because there really isn't that much volume for this grease to fill up. But you still want to pack it in there as much as you can. Honda's pretty stingy on the grease at the factory, though I will say that everything's looking pretty good for this bike, and my bike has just shy of 3,000 miles on it. I was actually going to do this whole rear linkage re-greasing at 3,000 miles, but since I got the new rear shock, obviously I'm just going to do it now while everything's apart. Again, be very liberal with the grease. There's no harm in putting too much in there, because it'll just take what it takes, and then whatever comes out you just wipe off grease is pretty cheap, so you don't really have to worry about wasting it. And just wipe off the excess, and then you are done. Whatever is left inside of these, I'm just gonna leave that in there, and then when I push the bolt through, it'll help to grease up the bolts, and then again, I'll just give it another wipe down once everything's on the bike. Something that SRC Moto has on their website as supplementary instructions on top of what Öhlins gives you is that the soft line output from the shock has to be facing aft on the bike, with the hose coming out to the left side of the bike. So if you don't do that, it probably won't fit quite right. So I just had to remove my chain guard there, I think, and now it should be able to fit through here without too much issue now. Oh, I'm already scratching my anodizing. Darn. I wonder, is that even possible? Or was it supposed to go up here? Let me double check my instructions. All right, I had the right place. I just forgot one step, and that is to remove the front sprocket, or at least get it out of the way. But that didn't seem to be what was binding it up. It seems to be binding between this part of the engine case and the frame. So we'll see if this helps. It may or may not. So I've got this piece of heavy wall aluminum tubing, and it is almost exactly the same diameter and just a little bit longer than the remote reservoir. And I just want to see if I can test, and yes, it does just barely fit through here. But I think with the extra constraint of the high pressure hose line, it just makes it that much harder to try and squeeze through this tight spot. There we go. So I'm not able to get the whole shock up there because of the braided line. So I'm going to try this another way. And just shove the whole works up from the get-go and see if that helps. No, that's not going to work. Or I should say it's quite a large radius. You need like 6 hands to do this job. There we go. So what you really need is either someone to help you with this, or have a little more forethought than I have, because I left the bolt over on the bench, which is about 20 feet away from me, and this is just going to fall right out if I don't have some way to prop it up. So be smarter than me. So the only way I'm going to be able to show you where this is it's hidden behind this wiring loom here, and you probably cannot see it from any angle. There it is, right there. And I've got to shove a wrench into here to try and capture the nut. And this is how I've decided that I'm going to hold that nut. I just have a couple layers of electrical tape that are going to hold the nut in place, and then I can just shove that into there and then use the bolt from the other side. What's also going to be difficult is trying to get this washer on there. And I do apologize, I'm probably going to be completely blocking your view of this whole thing, but there's not a whole lot that I can do about that right now. Honda does have a torque spec for this, but I don't know what that is off the top of my head. The manual's inside, and I don't even have a 1/2-inch drive torque wrench to be able to get it to spec, so I'm just gonna go as tight as I can go without busting anything off. That tape trick really works a treat. The next step is mounting the remote reservoir. To do that, you have to remove these 2 engine case bolts, which are not on tight at all. And they don't need to be tight. They aren't holding anything structural, it's just holding the gasket in place. Make sure you don't mix them up in case that they are different lengths. But they are the same, so if you did, you're going to get lucky. And then replace them. All right, I had that backwards. It's supposed to go this way. That way it'll mount a little closer to the engine. And if you get the socket the right way around, it works just a little bit better. All right, I'm just gonna get those hand tight for now. And feed that through. Now the real key here is to mount this up in such a way that the hose is not rubbing on the frame, which for me it's really going to want to do. So to have this clocked in the way that it doesn't rub on the frame, it interferes with the bolt on what I believe is the thermostat cover. And that's worse than it rubbing on the frame. And I think right there will probably do. Well, you know what? I probably do have this the wrong way around. But it does fit, so I'll just try and work with it. And it'll keep it a little tighter to the engine and out of the way of my leg. So, if anything, I can just tighten that up off camera. And so the next step is to get the sprocket back on and then start putting on the rear linkage. So I'll put the sprocket on off camera and then I'll meet you back up when we're assembling the rear linkage again. All right, so that was my fault. I actually had this plastic bracket on backwards. Didn't realize that till after I shut off the camera, but now you know, this is how it's supposed to look. Alright, so this is a test drive, and I can say it's already a huge improvement. Now, in last week's video, I said that it would be the following week that I would be installing this and testing it out. Well, it turns out it's actually just the next day, because as soon as I got home from that ride, the rear shock showed up, so I just installed it on the next day. So I have a very fresh idea in my mind of what this bike felt like yesterday compared to what it feels like today. Now the settings I have right now is the from factory preload setting, which is about halfway down the screw length for the preload. And then I'm 12 clicks out on compression,
and 16 clicks out on rebound, and I'm already feeling like I probably want to go with a little less rebound, maybe go 18 clicks out and try that. It feels like it's packing up just a little bit, but I will say even what I have now in a non-ideally tuned setup is way better than the stock setup. It's actually even more comfortable than the old spring, even though it's a stiffer spring, and it has, overall stiffer damping. And that amazes me. The other thing is that the wheel hop is completely gone. There is no more wheel hop on washboard gravel or, the medium-sized potholes. And that really amazes me. It's completely gone. Now, the only other difference between yesterday and today is that yesterday I was running 30 psi of tire pressure, and today I'm running 25. So I'm sure a little bit of what I'm feeling is that 5 psi. But even so, even when I would go from 30 psi down to 12 psi on the old suspension, I never really felt much, if any, difference in the way that it handled. It was pretty much the same no matter what the tire pressure was. So doing this is already much easier. The bike feels much more controlled. It's not jumping all over the place, throwing me off. I've only been riding this for about 6 miles, and I can already say, if you own one of these bikes, or really if you own any of these modern dual sport bikes that come with, very soft suspension, save up your money, sell an organ, rent something out, rent out your kids for a few days, whatever it takes. Get one of these shocks in the rear. It is a huge, huge difference. On the old suspension, I never would have been able to go this fast on this sort of terrain. It's floating over everything now. Replacing that front suspension made me able to go a little, there's that big rock again. Made me able to go a little bit faster, but not this fast. What a difference. Yeah, this is a truly amazing transformation. So I think if I put my luggage on this for doing moto camping, I would really have to crank up the preload a bit more, which is unfortunate because it's really hard to adjust on this bike. I would love to have gotten an Öhlins shock with the remote preloaded, the hydraulic preload adjustment. That would have been amazing. But that wasn't really an option for what I have. But maybe I can add that on, change out the spring, be more money, of course. Yeah, the bike is no longer just wandering all over the place. It is actually letting me control the direction a lot more. I think a lot of that is because with how bad the old suspension was, it was just bouncing around so much, my inputs really didn't mean much. It just was going to go where it was bouncing around to go anyway. One thing that was good about the old suspension is that because it was so poorly tuned, it encouraged you to take your time and go slow. Enjoy the scenery. Where this suspension just wants to make you go faster and faster and faster. I still think the front is a little stiff. But still, I can't complain too much. I mean, I'm able to go about 30 to 40 miles an hour on this now, where before 20 was kind of the top that I felt comfortable with. Before it'd crash over those two huge ruts, but now it just kind of floats over them. Part of that's because I'm going faster, of course, but wow, I'm just amazed by the transformation. Also, the bike feels a little more stable now, even on this really loose. I hate this loose, fresh, crushed rock they put down. It sucks you around like sand, and I've almost crashed a few times on it. But now with this more well-tuned suspension, it feels a lot more stable. All right. Let's try this downhill section a little quicker. Alright, going in the low 30s. It's important to focus more on where you're going and less on your actual speed. On one hand, I feel like I did this modification at the right time, as I was able to take my time and appreciate the bike in its stock form, so I can appreciate it now even more, that it has more performance capability. But on the other hand, I wish I would have done this a lot sooner, because I feel like it would have allowed my skill to improve a little faster. But that's okay. You don't always need to be in such a rush to get everything done. Sometimes taking your time, even when it comes to getting better at things, is just fine. I feel like compression is pretty much spot on, but I do want to redo that rebound just a hair. Well, steep hill. The camera never makes anything look, well, it always makes everything look very flat. Everything always steeper than it looks on camera. So there we have it. I am so happy with this. Öhlins for the win. So hope you enjoyed. Until next time, see ya.